Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us through a little bit of a tech glitch on the film. And just want to remind everyone that you do have access to watch the film over the next 48 hours. It will be live here. So if you want to go back and watch again, share with other family members, please do. And I'm wearing my I Believe Her t-shirt tonight. My friend Wadi Grossman made this in the wake of the Kavanaugh trials, and I thought it was appropriate attire for tonight. Anyway, I'm so excited to begin conversation about this film, and I'm going to introduce each of our speakers. First, I'm going to start with Tarana Burke. So excited that she's able to join us. When I read that she's been at this work at the intersection of racial justice and gender equity for 3 decades, I felt tired on her behalf because I've been doing my little slice of work for 10 years and I'm exhausted. So her work is deeply meaningful, and she became kind of a global name in 2017 when Me Too kind of took on a life of its own on the internet and became a viral sensation. But she's so much more than that hashtag, and she's going to share with us kind of her latest iteration of her movement, in which we all have a role to play. So welcome, Tarana from New York City, joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yay, it's so good to
be here. Thank you for having me.
So good to have you, Tarana. And then the woman who's responsible for the film you all just watched, Sarah Moshman. She is an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. She's also a TED speaker, and this is her 3rd feature documentary. And we were so excited that she could join us tonight because she's her due date with her 2nd child is this Sunday. And we literally had a plan B in case her son came early, but he's been very compliant and stayed in the womb. So joining us from Los Angeles, 2 for 1, a woman and a baby, Sarah.
What an introduction. Hello. Thank you so much for having me and for watching.
So good to have you. Well, I guess I'll start. Sarah, thank you for this film. I think it's so important. This is my 3rd time watching it, and each time I watch it, something new jumps out at me. There's so much complexity to this issue, and I think you did a beautiful job at capturing a lot of it. And I'd love to know kind of what motivated you, because you've made several films, like why this film, why now? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this really started for me in 2017. That my prior 2 films certainly center around the empowerment of women, representation of women on screen. But in 2017, as you know, life is very cyclical. I was actually pregnant with my daughter at the time. And as so many parents feel, you know, when you're impending parenthood, wanting to make the world a safer place for your child to exist in, and perhaps there's a special layer to that when you're going to be bringing a daughter into this world because of all the struggles we know that girls and women can and will face. And at the same time, I had my own experiences being sexually harassed, working in the television industry. It is just ripe with that behavior. And I never felt like I had a voice. I never felt like I knew who to go to or who to talk to, or would anyone take me seriously. And every single one of my female friends, truthfully, had a story of being harassed, assaulted, disrespected, violated. And certainly stories were coming out in 2017 prior to Harvey Weinstein and #MeToo, the incredible movement that Tarana founded in 2006. But there was just a lot sort of circulating for me. And I did the only thing I knew how to do in that moment, which is to pick up the camera and get to work. That is my form of activism. That's what I know how to do. And I just came to it with a curiosity and a feeling of empathy, like what is happening? How did we get here? And where are we hopefully going from here? And it just so happened that my very first shoot day, when I was like 8 months pregnant, I feel like I'm always pregnant, was October 4th, 2017. And then the Weinstein story, as we all know, unfolded the very next day. And then #MeToo was a week and a half later. So the timing was wild, and I didn't exactly know what I was making at first. I just had a lot of questions. And so I started interviewing employment attorneys and human resource representatives and diversity and inclusion managers and brave men and women willing to share their stories of survival. And I started to think about, well, what am I trying to say? And truthfully, I didn't want to make another film, and that takes nothing away from those films, that unpacks the bad behavior of one, of the guy at the top, the bad seed, who is certainly enabled by many other layers of people. It felt like that story was harped upon every single day, every headline. The focus was just, oh, how the mighty have fallen, another lawsuit. And that just wasn't interesting to me. It's like, that's not how we're going to solve the problem, is by getting one guy fired or one person going to prison. That's really not going to, yes, that's important, of course, that there are consequences for these actions, but how about the systems that brought that person to the surface in the first place? How did we get here? And so I always wanted the film to address more than just those stories, and also not to focus on the privileged white actresses, which were dominating a lot of the landscape. And it's important that they brought this issue to light, perhaps, but what about the everyday person that is your neighbor, your sister, your daughter, your friend, your uncle, that has gone through this and never saw justice, and it's truly impacted their whole life? So it was a process, certainly, of research. And, I've been in awe of Tarana Burke since I heard of her in 2017. So this is such a thrill to share space with her tonight. But it just was unpacking. What am I trying to say? How do I say it? And the individual stories that you see in the film kind of serve as the backbone. And then the experts that I had the honor of interviewing kind of weave it all together and talk about the issues. Yeah.
I love that you refer to your filmmaking as your activism, because that's the perfect segue into, I think, the way Tarana is kind of evolving the movement she started. And Tarana, I wanted to read a quote that you gave that I really liked. You said, the what's next question was always baffling to me, because I would say, we are next. This is not a spectator sport. This is not a movement that I meant for people to stand on the sidelines and watch happen. There is no movement if people are not actively engaged in it. This is about going deeper. And that just gave me chills. And I am so excited for you to share and tell us about this new initiative, Act Two. First of all, I love the name, that invites every single one of us to be involved in eradicating sexual violence. So please share with us all about it.
Yeah, well, first I have to say, Sarah, it's so good to listen to you, because we are in these different platforms all the time, and, whether it's on the news or in some kind of documentary or video, but people don't realize this, like, we could have that conversation one-on-one. It was just, I feel like, I say such similar things all the time to people about, what we've seen. And also I felt heartened by something you said about you didn't want to tell that story, because as much as we owe this moment to phenomenal journalism, there's also been a dearth of curiosity in journalism that followed, and people kept telling the same story. And I would say to journalists sometimes, I was a journalist, right? I understand what it is to be a reporter. Don't you have a curiosity for what else there is?
Yeah, right.
Most journalists I know don't want to tell the same story that person told. And it's not different when you just, shift out the person. You have to tell a really different story. So I really appreciated hearing that. But yeah, the last 3 years, that question of what's next is one of the two questions I get all the time. What's next from people who really do mean well, right? And I don't mean to say, part of what I said in that quote was that I had the next thing I said was that I had sort of an epiphany about, I made a commitment to this life and this work very early on. And there is also a way that those of us who have movement lives will get caught in our own bubbles, right? We only talk to each other. We use a particular language all the time. We move a particular way. And so what I used to say when people asked me what's next is, what can they do? How can they be involved? I'd say, look for the gaps, go into your community. And if you are a survivor, think about the things that you didn't have that would have made your experience following that trauma better. Think, if you're a parent, think about what's missing in the from the time your child leaves your house to the time they come home. Think about the people who they engage with and what kind of safety. Like, I would have all these things. And I felt really good about myself. Like, I had a really good answer. And then I had a woman come up to me after a talk, and she was like, like teary-eyed. And she was like, I'm so moved. I'm so ready to be a part of this movement. I want to contribute, but I've never done this work in my life. I have nowhere to start. I don't even know what gaps are. I'm not a survivor. I'm just, somebody who wants my community to be safer. And I hear you, she was almost apologizing, right? Like, I'm so sorry that I can't just get out and hit the ground running. And I thought, one, you shouldn't feel bad, right? That's part of what my job is supposed to be as a leader, is to create various entryways into this, right? My very first lesson in organizing when I was a teenager, an elder, when we had our little session, they said the very first rule of organizing is you take people from where they are, right? You have to start from where people are. You don't get them to come to you. You have to go to them and take them from where they are. And so when the opportunity came for us to create something, the very first meeting we had, FCB, this, Global Agency of the Year, by the way, let's just
I noticed
out there. They were just named by Adweek as the Global Agency of the Year. FCB, I was just talking about this in another interview. This had this way, I knew nothing about advertising. I knew nothing about the world of advertising. I knew nothing about, I didn't know anything much about corporate America, except the relationship is always like this between corporate America and movement. And it's, if there is a relationship, it's always like, hey, can you help us? Sure, take this charity. And then we kind of go our separate ways. And that was my sort of naive understanding of the possibilities of those kind of relationships. And meeting the folks at FCB, one, Carter Murray, the CEO, is a force. And then Susan is another force. And to get caught in between those two forces is something serious, right? But the thing that they taught us, our staff, the folks who work for me too, their everyday job is to figure out what's impossible, right? They literally just, they get paid to imagine. it's like, and they get paid, and not just imagine, but like they get presented with a problem, an issue, a challenge of some sort. And their job, so if you had asked me before, I would have said their job is to sell a product, right? I got a phone, I want a lot of people to buy it, give me a commercial. But really, it's I know I sound like a commercial for them, and I don't mean to, but it really was a fascinating process because sometimes we operate from scarcity on the movement side, where we always have a lack of resources, we always have needs that can't be met. And so we can kind of get caught up in this scarcity model. And then we came to the table with FCB and they were like, what do you want?
Wow.
And we came, right, I was like, I need a way to communicate with the world and help them understand that this is everybody's movement, that everybody can be involved. And I was just like, talking, like I thought the most we would get was like an ad in a major magazine or like a commercial or something. And then they started talking about technology and all these possibilities. And so we were put in a position to be with people who had this freedom to dream, right? To just like, they would say things like, tell us exactly what you want. And not because we can, like a genie, grant it, but we will work. We're not going to work towards what you think is possible. We're going to work towards what you actually want. What do you need? So yeah, this relationship over the last 2 years, we met in 2018, has been amazing because what we needed was a way to communicate to people that this is not a movement unless people move it. That everyday actions are what's going to be necessary to end sexual violence, to even come close to the idea of shifting a culture of around sexual violence. It's not going to be activism. It's not going to be marching in the streets and, chanting. And that's not going to do it. It's not going to be laws and policies. It's not those things alone. We have to shift the culture, which means we need multiple interventions. And they gave us a way to create multiple interventions through technology and to not have to drive it, right? As a, like, you know, people love to give you, they like crown you leader. Here you go, Tarana Burke, you are now the leader. But what that also means for a lot of people is solve it, right? We've got Greta on climate. We got Patrice Opal and Alicia on the Black folks. We got Toronto on sexual violence. We got it.
Yeah.
Right? We're done. And that's not real. It's not true. It's not real. And I'm not effective if I'm not effective in my role in trying to end sexual violence if I'm a singular figure representing that work. People have to understand that this is a collective, movement. And so Act 2, perfectly named, right? Second act, and also, you know, taking action, just gave us this opening to explain it succinctly and beautifully, and like say, here, look at the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some time to visit that site, and I want everyone that's listening to bookmark it and spend time there, because it's very much the model 3% has taken, which is about micro actions. It's like, it's very daunting to try to dismantle a system that's been in place forever. But when you bring it down to doable doses of like, this is a way that you can, you know, watch a film, share a book, share a chapter, small things, and you can actually set goals for yourself. So I love the kind of personal accountability element of the site. So kudos to that.
You don't need any special skill set.
Right. Like that woman that came to ask you, she mobilized immediately through a site like this.
And the other part, I'm sorry to keep harping on it because I'm very excited. The other last thing I'll say is, to your point, the other thing I love about it is that you don't need a special skill set, and it's about actions and micro actions. So yes, we need people to volunteer, to donate, to join a campaign. We need you to have, like, you know, feet to the street, to be responsive to what's happening in the world around sexual violence. But again, to shift culture, what I want is for the next set of jury members who are sitting in a trial to listen to whatever situation around sexual violence, to have a knowledge around the breadth of sexual violence, right? I need you to understand what trauma does to a survivor. I need you to understand the culture of violence in this country. You can do that by going on this site, and it says, read this book, listen to this podcast, watch this program, right? So it's also individual. The micro actions are about individual action. Literally everything you do towards this thing counts. Everything, right? If you can't do any of the actions, but you're committed to a series of micro actions for a year, you have now become an individual who will influence your sphere. Your sphere of influence is now touched by what you've learned. That is just as important to me.
Yeah, person by person.
That's like culture.
Yeah. So one of the scenes in the film that really jumped out at me, and because a lot of the people listening tonight work in the field of advertising, especially women, especially creatives, which is the genesis of 3%, was the story of Amani Lyle in the Friends writer room. And it's so reminiscent of what happens in creative departments and ad agencies all over the country. And that whole creative necessity, which was the ruling that kind of let them off from doing anything wrong, and kind of gave them a license to, you know, for vile treatment. It really bothered me. And it pretends that the writer's room is separate from every other kind of business. And I just would love to hear from each of you, like, first of all, that's just such bullshit. And like, how do we stop this exceptionalism that particular industries are above or have specific needs that, again, make women's safety and comfort secondary? That's just, I don't accept that. So I'm just wondering if either of you have thoughts about how you'd counteract that argument.
Well, I think the reason Amani Lyle's story spoke to me is because that's what, as we were saying, like that's what it's like in every industry where it's male dominated. And it feels like if you have a homogeneous, you know, writer's room, if it's all mostly white men, then that behavior becomes acceptable because everyone's doing it. And Amani was one of the only women in the room, certainly the only woman of color in the room. And she's a fantastic writer, and her whole career was derailed from working on Friends, one of the biggest television shows of all time. She only got to work on it for 2 months. She was fired. And then when she tried, had the audacity to fight back against Warner Brothers, of course she lost, because so many people thought as a First Amendment threat, like a free speech threat. And her case is certainly not black and white to me or to anyone. I think there's certainly nuance to be discussed about, well, how do you write a show with sexual themes without talking about sex? That's difficult. But what I think about her case that's so interesting is that the writers were really being more salacious and saying inappropriate things about the actresses, not the characters. And also, when you think about Friends as a TV show, it's not like X-rated. It's pretty wholesome. I mean, especially looking back, it's like, well, they really didn't push that far. So the idea that, she would reach this point of frustration is absolutely normal. And yet when you're in that environment, you're led to believe that you're the crazy one. You can't take a joke. It's on you. Like, you just need to be able to hang with the boys. Like, this is how it is. And that is just something that I think is repeated in advertising, in television, in film, in so many artistic careers, where if you have a lot of the same kind of person around that table, then the one person who, doesn't fit into that mold, that's marginalized, then ends up having to speak loudly for perhaps every writer's room after that, which is pretty astounding that Amani was really fighting for every writer's assistant in every writer's room that came after her. And it's amazing that her case was really 20 years ago, and yet it's more relevant than ever. And just like Tarana was saying, Amani, so many people are calling up Amani right now, and they're like, what do you think of all this Me Too? And she's like, I've been saying, like, it's just amazing how history is so circular. And she ended up, having an amazing career in the Air Force, but she was never able to be a writer. I mean, she writes, don't get me wrong, she's very happy she's a writer in the Air Force, but she should be a showrunner of a primetime TV show right now. Like, that should have been her stepping stone, like it is for so many men. And she lost out on that opportunity because she had the audacity to speak up for so many others. So if we have to learn something from her story, and we have to take that and run with it so that this doesn't happen again, because that's how this homogeneous groupthink continues on, and then nobody who's other can ever speak up and fight for what's right.
Yeah, I have, had these conversations in corporate spaces, go to do talks and things like that. And these kind of topics come up all the time. And I'm always fascinated how, I shouldn't be, but men in these conversations, and it's not that men aren't harassed. I don't want to, make it so binary, but oftentimes in my experience, the men in the situation are like, what can we do? How can we be better? Where did we go wrong? This is happening. I've seen, and they all of this incredulousness about the women who came forward after Me Too, and they're like, this is happening right under our, just like, you've got to be kidding me. And then when you go deeper into and ask more questions, or I always ask men in corporate spaces, when you're going into a meeting, have you ever had the experience of going into a meeting and another guy pull you to the side and say, listen, when you get in this meeting, Bob back there, he likes to grab crotches. Just watch out. He might grab your crotch. Don't worry about it. We just got to get the deal done. Right? You've never had that experience. You've never had somebody whisper to you over the water cooler, like, hey, I saw what happened in there. That was really disgusting. But, just a few more years at this level and you'll work your way up to the next, and you don't have to worry about that. Men don't, they literally do not engage with the material lives of women. When I used to do high school workshops, I would do this thing with the boys. We would bring the boys in. We'd have the girls in a circle, and then we'd have the boys sit in a circle outside of the girls, like we call it a fishbowl. And the boys could not say a word. They just had to listen, which was a challenge of its own. And then we'd have a discussion with the girls, and I'd ask them questions like, talk to me about how many decisions you make about your safety from the time you get up in the morning to get dressed for school to the time you get home.
Wow.
And the thing that's so interesting is that even the girls sometimes had to be coached because it's so second nature.
Yep.
They don't even think about it, right? Yeah. And then the girls would say things like, well, if I have gym that day, I pack my clothes instead of wearing them because if I wear two small shorts or, my tights or whatever, somebody might smack me on the butt. Or if my, practice goes on and it's dark out when I leave school. I make sure I have my mace out and my key. So, and I let the boys just kind of take that information in. I think we need that in these other spaces. I think there needs to be opportunities for men to really deeply engage with the material lives of the women who they are working with, and not from like this, it's always kind of distant. It's like, yeah, I got a mom and a daughter and a wife, and I think equality is really cool. And so like
for them, yeah.
I'm gonna come to this workshop that you're doing and nod and be like, wow, we should do that here. But I'm not gonna talk about that, you know, rape joke that somebody emailed me, or, you know, the receptionist who everybody thinks is hot and we all talk about terribly in the break room. They really need to engage in a different way. And it needs to start, the other thing I always say is it needs to start in HR. Because I'm always curious, when you get to the point where the guy has to be fired, because it takes a lot to fire somebody, right? It's not like they have gone through a lot of phases and done a lot of damage by the time they get fired. I want to know how they got hired, right? Like, what about this company when you got here said, you know what I could do here? I can take my dick out in the coffee room. Nobody's gonna care. That guy who's always saying creepy things, the guy who's touching her. Why do you think that's okay here? What culture did you witness when you got here that said, this is cool, right? We got to strip it all away and rebuild it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen that TED Talk that Sarah, I think her name is Marianne Cooper from Stanford, did about the prevalence of sexual harassment. And she said that there are 3 things that if an industry or a company has, it makes it so much more likely they will experience sexual harassment. It's highly hierarchical structure, male-dominated industry, and the last one is permissive of bad behavior, which is exactly what, Tarana, you were just alluding to. And when I watch this talk, I'm kind of like doing the checklist of the advertising world. We're like, got that, like the trifecta. So it really is a reckoning around what we'll tolerate. And it's so funny when HR has 0 tolerance in their handbook, but then when something goes wrong, suddenly there seems to be a lot of tolerance. Or like the fact that 911 caller was brought into the interrogation room, she was extracted from the workplace. And that happens at times in the advertising world. It's so crazy. Well, I'm gonna go through one more question and then we're gonna open it up to the questions from the rest of the attendees. But recently, Tarana, I had a male friend of mine who's very senior reach out to me, and he was kind of mystified because he'd heard a comment on the news about what the Black Lives Matter movement could learn from the Me Too movement, almost like a cautionary tale of what went wrong. And my friend was confused and he said, I don't get it. Like the Me Too movement was such a raving success. And I said, well, you know, yes, the Me Too movement, some people are in prison. Yes. Some women are being believed. Yes. People are now listening. Yes. But the systems have not been operationalized to, you know, disable that behavior. And so I wonder, when you have a man, especially a man in leadership, that has that kind of disconnect around how incredibly systemic this is and what it would look like to heal inside of a corporate setting. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's as simple as the microaction approach, which is, you know, committing to that. But I believe that also there has to be more women in leadership, because that's where the whole self-correction happens almost culturally. But what are your thoughts about that?
You know, I was talking about this earlier. I do absolutely, and I want to give this disclaimer. I absolutely believe in women's leadership, and I believe that women should be in more positions of power. I also believe, though, that we have to be very careful about this idea of we just need more women. Right. Because so many women have been socialized that in order to advance, right, you have to mimic men. And so if you get the kind of woman in leadership that thinks patriarchy is okay, and has embraced misogyny and patriarchy in their own, and don't think they have to hold the door open for another woman, or think it's okay to make another woman's life harder because that's what I went, like, we have to be kind of careful about that. That's just a general thing I want to say. Yeah. But I also think, I mean, and some of it about having women in leadership and people of color in leadership is that diversity of thought just is better for a creative process, right? Like nobody should want, as you were saying, like a homogeneous situation where we all think alike. That's just boring after a while. You're going to keep creating the same things. But there really has to be an undoing or a re-education. I just think, to your point about the executive who's clueless, I have come across that at all levels, not just executives. I have come across that kind of like incredulousness and just can't understand so much. And again, if it doesn't affect you, then there's, and I think we're all guilty of that to some extent, right?
Yeah.
I often use my daughter is queer and gender nonconforming, and my daughter came out at like 13 as queer, and I was like, cool, no sleepovers, but cool, this is great, right? Well, I have to stop telling that joke, but you know, it was not really that big a deal. But because of it, I became more acutely connected to what was happening in queer spaces, what was happening with LGBTQ folks, right? Mm-hmm. And then some years later, they came out as gender nonconforming. And so what I realized then, even more so than before, was that I had done all of the right things language-wise, and you know, I was respectful and I was inclusive, and I always talked about trans folks and this and that kind of thing. But I really had not connected with the material lives of people with who are gender fluid, right? I had not really thought about, invested in, tried to understand what goes on in the lives of these people who, my daughter is now one of these people. My child is one of these, is a part of this community, not these people. But you know what I mean? And so I now have a very different connection to that. It's one of the reasons why, even though I joke about it, I don't begrudge men who say, you know, I want this to happen because I have a daughter or whatever. Because honestly, whatever the entry point is to you having a deeper understanding, I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
You know, right? If you want a better life for your daughter and that's why you are invested in this, that's fine. I'm not going to begrudge you. But I do think that from a binary perspective, I think that men have to be intentional about understanding what is, and it's not hard, right? Information is everywhere. You can do a good deep Google search and come away with, you know, go to Act 2 and spend some time on the website. Because the era of being disconnected and being removed is over. It's over. This is here. Me Too is here. Black Lives Matter is here. Climate change is here. Gun control is, they've always been here, right? All of these things have been around. But I think we are at a moment, I say this a lot when people say, oh, women have finally found their voice, or Black people are finding their voice. And I'm like, no, we have been yelling and screaming for a long time. But we have maybe found a frequency that y'all can hear us on now. And we are going to stay in this moment on that. It's not going to change anytime soon. So I really feel strongly that instead of trying to put that labor on the folks who are dealing with the thing, that the people who don't understand have to be intentional about investing in themselves, right? Because it's about humanity at the end of the day. Invest in yourself to be closer to this information, to the people, to the knowledge. Get in there. Don't just read How to Be Anti-Racist and think you've done the work. Mm-hmm. Don't watch the documentary and think, you know, I saw a great documentary and I read this book and I saw Tarana Burke speak and I think I get it.
Right, you actually have to do something. And the beautiful thing that happens, especially when men get involved, is that they can then help other men instead of putting that burden of labor on women. And I tell a story a lot. I have two sons, and when they were maybe like 8th grade and 11th grade, somewhere in there, we were out to dinner and my younger son said something just mildly sexist. And I opened my mouth to kind of guide him. And my older son said, I got this, Mom. And he counseled his brother over the dinner table.
You did it.
Oh, Mom, right.
That's like exactly what needs to happen at scale and inside corporations. And so I love that. All right, well, we have some questions coming in from people that are listening. The first one's just kind of tactical for Sarah, is about the film. How is it being distributed? Where are people viewing it? I also am going to add on my question. Like, I'm hoping this is being shown in some universities and schools.
Yeah, so I'm working with an incredible distributor called IndieFlix, and with their help, we're screening this in workplaces, in schools, corporations, organizations all over the world. I did a similar business model with another film called The Empowerment Project, and we are 6 years out here, and that film is still screening all over the place. So instead of going to a streaming platform, which I have also done, is a wonderful experience, this film is really meant to be seen and to be had in conversation within a corporation, within a school. So we have an entire discussion guide that accompanies the film with resources and questions and a glossary of terms, and you can isolate clips from the film on our dashboard. We really designed this to be a film-based program, a film-based curriculum. When I said it's really the intersection of activism and storytelling with this film. And to me, to throw it up online and hope people watch it and click it and view it and share it would be nice, but I've done that and it feels a little empty, to be honest. I'd much rather have incredible dialogues like this one and be able to engage with people and have corporations say, okay, the Imani Lyle story in the Friends Writers Room, that's very relevant to our organization. Let's kind of explode that story and talk about how that shows up here. Or we want to make sure that doesn't show up here. So how do we avoid that? So the film is not just like a Band-Aid for if there's a sexual harassment escapade in the workplace. It can also be used in so many other facets. And it's just been amazing. This year, I really finished the film earlier this year. I had an in-person premiere in February, which I now very much appreciate more than ever. Thank you. I'm like daydreaming about it, being with human beings in one room. I'm so glad we did it. And then, we had grand plans to travel all over the place and do all the in-person stuff. And none of that happened. And it's been honestly an unexpected blessing to do these virtual events, to be able to share space with incredible experts. And also, one part that I didn't expect that I think is really important to mention is that viewers can anonymously ask questions. And that's something that you don't get in an in-person event where someone could be a survivor and chances are they're not going to raise their hand and say, this happened to me, what do I do? And so in this Zoom setting, in this virtual setting, they can actually ask a question anonymously, get resources anonymously. And that has been such a blessing of this year, to be able to provide that, especially when we have experts on the panel, like an employment attorney, like an HR rep, or even within a corporation for an employee to safely feel like they can ask without speaking up, and all the pressure that comes with that. So I'm very proud of how we're distributing the film, and anyone, anywhere can host their own screening just like this one at neverthelessfilm.com. We'd be happy to give anyone more information on that. And that's the plan for the foreseeable future. And it maybe sounds small to some people, but it's really amazing, this person-to-person interaction. And just like Tarana was saying, it's those micro moments that change happens. Like that goes perfectly with what we're doing with the film. It's not about getting 10 million people to see it, although that would be great. It's really about how do we get, an HR company rep to use this as part of their sexual harassment training. So often sexual harassment training is very boring, or it's people just phone it in like it's traffic school. They check the box and they move on. What if this was actually an interesting, cinematic, entertaining experience where people could come together and talk about it just like this? So that's our crazy vision. And Sheila Andreen over at IndieFlix is my role model and mentor, and the two of us and an incredible team at IndieFlix, we're constantly brainstorming new ways to get the film out to the world. And it's very much person by person, company by company, school by school. And I'm glad you bring up schools, because we've been screening in business schools, in law schools. We want to be screening in medical schools, because truly those are our future leaders of America. And there's not a lot of training for those people before they become supervisors and managers in the field of like gender justice, sexual violence, sexual harassment. So we feel like if we can get in front of them before they graduate, then they're going to have a little bit more of a toolkit going into that leadership position. So, yeah.
Sarah, we got to get the film on Act 2 as an action people can take.
That'd be great. Absolutely.
See? Here it is. Well, there's another question, Tarana, for you. And you have always centered survivors, which is so unique to your approach. What advice would you give to a survivor to get access to resources? I mean, obviously, we're talking about activism for everyone, but what about someone that's in crisis?
Yeah, I mean, our approach to this work we center survivors because our approach to this work is about healing and action.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way since I started doing this, because I came into the work as an organizer who was a survivor. And I always thought it was almost unethical to ask people to put themselves on the front line without offering them the space to have healing for themselves, right? I think about community healing and individual healing. So if you are in crisis as an individual, we have tons of resources on our site. One of the goals I had with creating the site for the Me Too movement site was to fill one of those gaps that I talked about, right? As a younger Black woman who was doing this work with Black and brown girls in small communities, I would go to it sounds crazy to say to people now, the internet was fairly new, but the idea of Googling things in 2005, it was very new. And so I would search, and I could not find culturally relevant materials and things around sexual violence. Even in this, if you notice in this moment when Me Too went viral, we had all these actresses, which I think was so bold and brave to come forward and tell their stories. We have very few come from the Black community. Mm-hmm. And I know some of the stories, right? Because I've used them, I've mined for them and used them. So one, I would say check our site. It's MeTooMVMT.org, MeTooMovement.org. But also there are so many resources, so many other websites that exist out there that will tell you what's local. One of the things we do on our site is if you put in you can really get granular. You can say, I am a Native, queer, veteran, living in the Midwest. What is there for me? And it'll narrow it down to what are the live resources in your community that will help you. This is not about action. This is totally about survivors. Yes. So I would definitely say start with our site. And then also we list lots of other organizations because, again, we have limited capacity, but we see ourselves as sort of a clearinghouse. Yeah. And lastly, don't underestimate the people who are around you. I tell survivors all the time, be very careful with your story, which is the opposite of what a lot of folks hear nowadays. It's like, tell your story. And we hear it all the time, but you have to be I believe we have to be very careful about who we share our stories with, because everybody can't hold it. Everybody can't create a safe space and a container for you. But I do think it's great to do inventory of who you have around you. And if you think you have a person who meets that, and I mean a person who will engage you from just a place of empathy and compassion and love, that's your experience with them, take a chance and share with them. And it just feels really good to get it out your body. Yeah. You don't have to do an Instagram live. You don't have to write a blog. You don't have to do a tweet storm about it. You can draw a picture, write a poem, put it in your journal, or share it with your best friend. It's just really getting that story out of your body as a first step is really helpful, particularly if you're in crisis. And then, finding some resources through these other places I mentioned.
I love the way you tied that to getting it out of your body, because I think people discount. There's that book, The Body Keeps the Score, and people discount. Yeah, I mean, you're feeling it, you're holding it. It's in your cells. It's in your dreams at night. Like, just to share it with someone. So I love that. We have another question from someone named Julie, and I love this question. She's talking about youth, girls, and social media, and that there's so much happening there and kind of under the radar about the messages they're absorbing and just the proximity of all these messages. I'm wondering the role, obviously, Tarana, you're using social media as an antidote to some of this stuff, but what are the ways we can, train our girls to be good and savvy consumers of social media so that they're still part of their social networks, but that they're not as vulnerable to some of the stuff that they might encounter there?
I don't know if you want to, Sarah, jump in for this one.
I'm new to the parenting game, so I'm not quite there with the social media yet, but at least from my perspective, it seems like, having a healthy amount of screen time built in terms of limiting how much our daughters and sons, are interacting with social media, because it's just so toxic, even for adults who, have a little bit more sense of the airbrushed images and the way that we're trying to be manipulated. Like, I just ordered an Instagram ad today. Like, I had to have the sports bra, it's just crazy how the algorithms are tracking us. And it's just profound how, at least in films like The Social Dilemma, when you're not paying for a service, you are the product.
Oh,
I think
that's the line that got me in that movie.
That's it. Yeah. That's all you need to know about social media. And if you're cool with that, continue. But I think with kids, it's just such a tricky, I sort of dreading this part of parenthood, and I'm open to any tips, but I think maybe the more we can call it out, even with the books I read to my daughter, my 3-year-old, it's, reading Sleeping Beauty. It's like, you read that story and you're like, that's weird that he kissed her while she was asleep. That's not good. Being able to, like, let's get this right. Even the films that we're watching, we watch Frozen like every day of my life right now. I watch Frozen and Frozen 2. And so, it's pretty good messaging in that film, but just being able to call out things as they happen and hopefully get our kids to critically think, so that they're not just victim to all of the messaging that are trying to get them to buy a product to feel less than, so that they'll buy a product, or to be the product. So it's a pretty profound time in our history with all this social media and childhood happening at the same time.
I agree. I think we have to be very vigilant. My child is 23 and is just, purely came up with social media as these things were becoming popular. They were coming of age. And so you may not want, I went kind of hard in paint. We didn't do phones at night. I monitored every, my daughter was on chat, and they still have them, right? These chats, these video games that are chats, and you're meeting strangers. And so I was very vigilant around that. And still they find ways around it, right?
Yeah.
There's apps on the phone that look like calculators that are really whatever, there's all types of ways they get around it. So as vigilant as you want to be, as you try to be, that kids are smart and savvy, and predators, and not just predators like sexual predators, but just the people who want to get into their brains are even more clever. So I do think that we have to have plans, to be quite honest. I think as parents and as people who have influence over children, whether they're your children, your nieces, your nephews, you're a teacher, I think we have to be thoughtful and strategic about what is our plan of action going to be around social media. I think, like, right now, you can be thinking about that with a 3-year-old. How much am I going to let, in my house, when my daughter was coming up, we didn't do TV during the school week, unless it was something related to school, you had to watch a movie, whatever. And then Saturdays, because we also came up around with Hulu and Netflix and all of that. And so Saturdays in DVR, we could sit down and we just watch TV for a few hours and catch up on whatever the little things are we missed. And I'd give the phone back. And, so it was my plan. And I, fumbled the ball a bit and I kept at it. But I also think we need comprehensive sex education as a counter, because we can only do but so much as parents. Pop culture is a massive, massive, massive force that is so difficult to fight. Yeah. And if we could get in our curriculums in school, comprehensive sex education that help children, regardless of how they identify gender-wise, to understand these things that we're trying to, in the moment, teach them about sexism, about this, about that, have that embedded in their curriculum that's age appropriate. I always say, if you can teach a kid not to run with scissors, you can teach them boundaries, right? We teach please, thank you, and consent. Yeah. It all kind of can go together. And you just keep building on that year after year. And then we have a generation of young people who have, like, I don't know how old you all are. I'm not going to try to guess, but I came up in the DARE era, when the beginning of that, right? Just say no. Yeah. Nancy Reagan telling us to say no to drugs, regardless of what her husband was doing. She was right there at our schools and our things, telling us just say no. And I came up with, this is drugs, and this is your brain on drugs, right? All of those kind of things. No, it didn't end drug use. It didn't stop it. But certainly, when I was offered a joint, I definitely thought about my brain on drugs, right? I don't want to scramble my brain, right? So to those folks who are out there who are in this industry too, it's also about crafting messaging that stays with young people, that stays like that helps shift the narrative around these things. That parents and can't do it alone, and children can't do it alone. That's kind of the bottom line. I'm sorry I give long answers. I just
no, it's awesome. I like that you remembered kind of an ad slogan, because my sons tell me that drinking and driving is like not even a thing anymore. I mean, part of that is due to maybe Uber, but that whole Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? I mean, that worked. I mean, in my high school class, I had several boys that died of, in car wrecks because of alcohol, and just doesn't happen anymore. So to everyone that's on this, listening in, that makes media and makes advertising, I do think we have a tremendous opportunity to shape everything in terms of our kids' safety and exposure. So let's maybe wrap up. I'd love for maybe each of us, and I can start to for just a few minutes to talk about like our closing comments about this issue. I actually convened and moderated something last night on Fishbowl Live about this subject to kind of bring the industry together again around it. And it was really fascinating. And what I think came out of that, which I'll share here, is a few things. One was sexual harassment affects every single person in society and every single corporate bottom line. I mean, if you are distancing yourself from this issue because you think, I mean, even like if you're a woman and you've not experienced in the workplace, or if you're a man and you think it hasn't intersected with you, you are wrong. Like, it is literally impeding the talent in your company. It is, to Tarana's point, running like malware in the back of women's minds and their capacity, because they have to like think of their safety so much. So there's a real cost that affects all of us. And so all of us need to solve it. And then there was a real clear thread in last night's conversation around the need for a new modern masculinity, that men are willing, they're listening, and that they're really need to be guided into like, what does modern masculinity look like, and how can they, and the film addressed this, how can they take on more, traditionally female attributes that make them express their full emotionality and not have to live in this man box. So, and then lastly, that if you are a victim of sexual violence or sexual harassment, that there are absolutely resources no matter where you live. We had the woman who founded Empower Work on last night, and she created a text-based system. They literally hear from people in workplaces from inside bathroom stalls silently texting for help in a terrible situation, and they get that peer counseling immediately in real life. So I feel like technology is saving a lot of like in real life moments. So that would be my take. And also to share this film, like I think it's such an important movie. Like I said, I've watched it 3 times, and every time there's something new I take from it. It's a very dense film. There's a lot of content. And we will also be sending out to everyone that's on this at this event, our sexual harassment module that 3% created based on our conferences, that's part video, part discussion guide for creative cultures to convene around. So, go to Tarana's Act 2 website, share this film, use our resources, and just start talking with everyone in your family and your company. So that would be my 2 cents. And then maybe Sarah, do you want to chat, and then Tarana can close us out?
Yes, certainly all of that. I was thinking this year has been eye-opening for so many reasons, with the global pandemic, certainly, but with the re-immersion, and it didn't go anywhere, but the Black Lives Matter movement really dominating the headlines this year, as it rightfully should. I think for me, as a white woman of a certain amount of privilege, cisgendered, it has been really eye-opening for me to think about, and Bell Hooks said it best, white women really sit at this intersection of being the oppressor and the oppressed. So I think that's really how I tie together the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, that I could be over here in Me Too saying, I'm oppressed, I'm oppressed, I'm oppressed, we need men at the table, all of that, and shout from the mountaintops. But if I don't turn over here and recognize the ways in which my behavior could be racist, could be contributing to racism, because I was raised in a white supremacist culture, like we all have been, then I'm really missing the point of both movements. And so connecting those dots has been really profound for me this year, and a journey of introspection that I hope lasts a lifetime. And that's what I would say is just think about where you sit. Which position of privilege do you have? Because we all have some. And the film says it best, you know, privilege is invisible to those who have it. So it's time for us all to recognize at which intersection we sit with our privilege, and then what can you do to help other people that don't have as much privilege as you have. Because so much of my work is like, gosh, why don't men take part in this? And we need men at the table, and men are part of the solution. And we shouldn't call these women's issues because that really absolves men of all role here. And men. And it's not a women versus men. It's just like a join us feeling. And I think if I don't apply that very same logic to the Black Lives Matter movement and how I, as a white cisgendered woman, straight woman, can be an allyship to people of color, then it just means nothing. So I think to me, that's been a really profound journey this year. And I would encourage others to think about, where does your privilege sit and how can you help others that don't have as much privilege as you have? Because that's the point of both movements to me.
Beautiful.
I would add, before I close out to that point, that the other place that Black Lives Matter and Me Too meets, sometimes when people characterize the two, it's Me Too is about women and Black Lives Matter is about Black folks, but they really mean Black men. And so then Black women get lost.
Right.
And I had a lot of people say to me this year, you know, we're not doing Me Too right now. We're really focused on Black Lives Matter. And this is where the energy should go. And then I say things to them like, you know that Black women have the second highest rate of sexual violence, experience the second highest rate of sexual violence in this country behind Indigenous women. Right? And if our Black survival doesn't matter, how do you support Black Lives Matter if you don't support the survival of Black women? And then I say things to them like, the second highest, like police brutality is the number one complaint against police officers, law enforcement across this country. The number two is sexual violence. And so if we're talking about the police and defunding, reforming, whatever your position is about the police, we're also talking about dealing with sexual violence. And on top of that, if you know that Black people have adverse experiences with police, then you are dealing with a group of folks, meaning Black women and other women of color, who both die at the hands of police and are sexually assaulted at the hands of police, right? So I love the idea of examining your privilege and where you sit in that intersection. And I would encourage folks to not think of these as separate at all. If Black Lives Matter, it's Black women's lives matter, right? We rallied around Breonna Taylor this summer, and it's a very interesting dynamic that happens all the time. For me, it's not because my brain is like, I nerd out about these things. But if you peel a layer back, in so many of these violent situations, the police officer who actually murdered Breonna Taylor has also has several complaints of sexual harassment against him. Right? It's almost like an indicator. The young man who had the plot to kill Joe Biden had been arrested a few weeks before for child pornography. So like there are these correlations that people don't take sexual violence seriously. They don't see it as part of the movement, right? We individualize the idea of sexual violence. When somebody experiences it, it's about you getting better, and that's something you need to do, and then you need to go to law enforcement, and you. And I would encourage people also, and this is my closing statement for real, to think of this as, this is not an individual thing. It is a community problem, right? And I say this often, and you've heard me say it before, forgive me, but this is the lesson the other lesson I learned as a young organizer, is collective responsibility, right? And if community problems call for community solutions, and if we could just muster up half of the courage of the people who came forward and said Me Too, then we could step out and do something different about making sure other people don't have to say Me Too. This is not, you don't have to be a survivor. You don't have to be, know a survivor, even though you probably do. You don't have to be connected to it in very intimate ways to want to have safe communities. The same way we want to get rid of gun violence in our communities, we should want to get rid of sexual violence. The same way we respond to somebody being shot down in the street, we should be responding to children being molested in our community, or people who can't walk from their home to their car, across their dorm without being attacked. We have to care about this collectively in order to move the needle. It is not something for you, like to my quote, to end it back on that quote,
Yes.
It's not something for you to stand on the sidelines. Nothing will happen. And you'll see the same people dragging themselves along, wearing ourselves out until we're about ready to die, because I do not want to be the face of this movement in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a 24-year-old with a fresh message, with a dynamic vision, who is taking Me Too or whatever the thing is to the next level. And in order for that person to be formed, in order for us to cultivate that, we have to do it collectively. They have to know it's safe for them to come forward with those visions. They have to know that they have space and safety and protection to explore those visions. That takes community. And we are all in community with each other. So I just hope that people take that away from this, visit our website, see how you can be involved. I don't care if you never do it, go to Act 2. But if you never go to Act 2, if you never come to our website, just just right now, make a small commitment to yourself that you will figure out a way to be intentional about doing something about sexual violence.
Beautiful. Such an incredible evening. I'm so grateful to everyone that tuned in, and to Sarah and Tarana for your wisdom and your leadership and your vision. So just want to remind everyone the film will be up here until 5 p.m. on Thursday. Revisit it, share it. We have an email going out momentarily with our 3% video learning module that is yours to use inside your companies. And then obviously Tarana has just a host of incredible resources waiting for you at the Act 2 site. Sarah, good luck with that baby.
He's been moving around the whole time. He's here.
You are cool.
I had this moment where I imagined, like, what if she went into labor, right?
I just like turned my camera off. I'm like,
Sarah, do you have a name for your son already?
I do.
Are you sharing or are you not sharing?
Not shared with anyone, but
okay,
he'll be born very soon. Follow me on Instagram. You can see a picture.
All right.
Okay. I hope
baby showing up.
I'm just saying thank you and shout out to baby boy. He did us good tonight.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, IndieFlix, for partnering with us here. And have a good evening, everyone. We appreciate it.
Have a good evening. Good luck, Sarah.
Thank you, Tarana.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.